Imagine for a second that you run a business. But it's a very specific kind of business. In this business, every time you screw up, you get paid. If you burn dinner, your customer pays you double. If you lose your customer's luggage, they give you a bonus. And if you just decide to sit in your office and do absolutely nothing while billing for a full day's work, the government sends you a check for millions of dollars. This sounds like a fantasy, right? A scam that would get you thrown in prison within a week. But for a decade in the Middle East, this wasn't a fantasy. It was the business model. Welcome to the Iraq War. You know the military history. You know about the invasion, the surge, and the withdrawal. But you probably don't know the story of the greatest financial heist in American history. A heist that didn't happen in a bank vault, but in the cafeterias, laundry rooms, and supply convoys of a war zone. Today, we are following the money. Specifically, the $40 billion that went to a single company, Halliburton, and its subsidiary, KBR. We are going to look at how they charge taxpayers $100 to wash a single bag of laundry, how they billed for tens of thousands of meals they never served, and how they drove empty trucks in circles across the desert just to burn fuel and charge the Pentagon for the mileage. By the end of this video, you will understand why modern wars have become so impossible to win. Because when the people supplying the war are making more money than the people fighting it, victory isn't the goal, profit is. To understand this crime scene, we have to go back to the scene of the crime. The Pentagon, early 2003. The invasion of Iraq is imminent. The drums of war are beating. And in the back rooms of Washington, a massive problem is being solved. The US military is about to invade a country the size of California, but they don't have enough troops to do the cooking, cleaning, and logistics. In World War II, soldiers did everything. If you needed a latrine dug, a soldier dug it. If you needed potatoes peeled, a soldier peeled them. But by 2003, the philosophy had changed. The logic was simple. Let soldiers fight, and let private companies handle the rest. It sounds efficient on paper. But there was a catch. The government needed a contractor big enough to handle logistics for an entire army. And there was one company that stood head and shoulders above the rest. A company called Halliburton. Now, Halliburton wasn't just any company. Until 2000, its CEO was a man named Dick Cheney. You might know him better as the Vice President of the United States at the time of the invasion. Now, I'm not saying there was a conspiracy. I'm just looking at the contracts. And the contract Halliburton got was called LogCap. And buried inside this massive legal document was a tiny little clause that turned the war into an all-you-can-eat buffet for corporate accountants. It's called cost plus. This is the weapon that killed the budget. In a normal world, if I hire you to build a house, we agree on a price. If you go over budget, that's your problem. You eat the cost. But a cost-plus contract works the opposite way. The government agrees to pay the contractor for all their expenses, whatever they are, plus a guaranteed percentage of profit on top. Think about the incentives there. If Halliburton spends $1 million building a base and their guaranteed profit is 2%, they make $20,000. But if they spend $10 million building that same base, they make $200,000. Suddenly, efficiency is the enemy. Every dollar you save is a dollar of profit lost. The more you waste, the more you make. It was a system designed to fail, and boy, did it fail. Let's look at the ghost meals scandal. This is one of the most documented cases of fraud from the entire war. KBR, the Halliburton subsidiary, was in charge of feeding the troops. They ran the dining halls on American bases. They were paid based on how many meals they prepared. Auditors later found that at just one base for months, KBR was billing the government for 42,000 meals a day. That's a lot of food. The only problem? The base only had 14,000 soldiers. Where did the other 28,000 meals go? Nowhere. They didn't exist. KBR was charging for ghost food for ghost soldiers, and because of the cost-plus contract, the more phantom meals they billed, the higher their guaranteed profit fee went. When government auditors finally caught this, did KBR go to jail? Did they lose the contract? No. They argued that the contract was vague about headcount requirements. The Pentagon, desperate to keep the war running, largely looked the other way, and the checks kept clearing. But ghost meals were just the appetizer. The main course was logistics. Driving trucks across Iraq was dangerous. It required security, fuel, and drivers. It was expensive. And for KBR, expensive meant profitable. Whistleblowers, the brave truck drivers and logistics officers who actually saw this happen, started reporting something insane. They saw convoys of flatbed trucks driving hundreds of miles across the dangerous Iraqi desert, carrying absolutely nothing. They called them sailboats, trucks hauling nothing but air. Why would you risk drivers' lives to move empty trucks? Because KBR got paid by the mile and by the asset usage. If a truck sat still, it wasn't generating cost. If it was moving, it was burning fuel, requiring maintenance, and racking up billable hours. So they drove them in circles. The empty trucks were bad enough. But at least the trucks were just wasting fuel. When we start looking at the services provided directly to the soldiers, the story gets darker. It stops being about financial waste and starts being about human exploitation. Let's talk about laundry. It sounds trivial, I know. But in a war zone, clean uniforms are a necessity for hygiene and morale. KBR had the contract to wash soldiers' clothes. According to reports from the oversight committees, KBR was charging the American taxpayer an average of $100 for every bag of laundry they washed. $100 for a bag of dirty t-shirts and socks. You could buy a brand new wardrobe for that price. How does a bag of laundry cost $100? It's the magic of the subcontractor markup. KBR would hire a local Iraqi company to do the actual washing for a few dollars. Then they would add their administrative fees. Then they would add their overhead. Then they would add their guaranteed profit percentage. By the time the bill hit the Pentagon's desk, a $5 service had become a $100 luxury charge. And remember, the soldiers didn't have a choice. They couldn't go to a laundromat down the street. They were a captive market, and the taxpayer was paying the monopoly price. But if laundry was a ripoff, the water situation was a health hazard. One of the most basic requirements for an army in the desert is water. You need it for drinking, for showering, and for sanitation. KBR was responsible for the water supply at many bases. Internal documents and whistleblowers later revealed that for months, KBR was providing water that was not potable. It was contaminated. Soldiers were showering in it and brushing their teeth with it. They were getting sick. Dysentery and skin infections were spreading. The managers at KBR knew there were issues with the filtration units. But under the logic of the war economy, stopping to fix the problem meant stopping the billing cycle. So the water kept flowing, the soldiers kept getting sick, and the invoices kept getting paid. In 2008, KBR eventually settled a lawsuit regarding this, but they admitted no liability. This is the ugly truth of privatizing a war. When you turn a soldier into a customer, you stop caring about their well-being and start caring about their profit margin. Now you might be wondering, where were the police? Where were the accountants? Who was watching the store? The answer is nobody. Iraq in 2003 and 2004 was the Wild West of finance. The US government was so desperate to get money into the country to jumpstart the economy that they weren't even using bank transfers. They were using pallets. I want you to visualize this. The Federal Reserve in New York would package billions of dollars in $100 bills. They would shrink wrap these bricks of cash onto wooden pallets, load them onto C-130 cargo planes, and fly them into Baghdad. Once they landed, the cash was distributed by the Coalition Provisional Authority. It was chaos. We are talking about $12 billion in cash that was flown in. And to this day, the Pentagon cannot fully account for billions of it. One audit found that nearly $9 billion of reconstruction funds could not be properly tracked. There is a famous story about a contractor named Custer Battles. These guys weren't a massive corporation like Halliburton. They were more like opportunists who saw a gold rush. They got a contract to provide security at the Baghdad airport. They needed equipment, specifically forklifts, to move cargo. So they went out and found some old beat-up forklifts from the 1970s. They were rusted and broken. They paid about $3,500 a piece for them. Then they bought some blue paint. They painted over the rust. They didn't fix the engines, they just made them look new. Then they invoiced the US government, but they didn't bill for $3,500. They billed the Pentagon $10,000 for each forklift. They claimed they were top-of-the-line equipment. When the forklifts inevitably broke down, they billed the government again for repairs. This is called upcoding, or just plain fraud. Custer Battles was eventually sued by whistleblowers under the False Claims Act. But here is the kicker. For years, their defense lawyers argued that the Coalition Provisional Authority wasn't technically part of the US government, so stealing from it wasn't technically a crime. That is the level of cynicism we are dealing with. And this wasn't just small-time crooks. Major infrastructure projects were failing left and right. Parsons Corporation was given hundreds of millions to build health clinics across Iraq. They were supposed to build 150 modern medical centers. After spending the money, how many did they finish? 6. Just 6. And even those had sewage leaks and electrical problems. They took the money, did a fraction of the work, and left the Iraqi people with empty shells of buildings. The result was a double tragedy. The American taxpayer was robbed of billions of dollars, but the Iraqi people were robbed of their future. We promised to rebuild their country better than before. Instead, we paid contractors to build safe houses for money that eventually vanished into offshore bank accounts. And through all of this, the one company that kept growing, kept winning contracts, and kept its stock price climbing was Halliburton. In the next section, we are going to look at the specific mechanism that allowed the biggest fish to escape the net, and how the revolving door between the Pentagon and the boardroom ensured that the heist was perfectly legal. So how did they get away with it? How did a company like Halliburton face scandals about ghost meals, contaminated water, and overbilling, yet continue to receive billions in new contracts? The answer lies in a concept known as the revolving door. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a career path. In Washington, there is a well-worn track between the Pentagon, Congress, and the boardrooms of defense contractors. The people writing the checks and the people cashing them are often former colleagues, or sometimes the exact same people, just a few years apart. Take the case of the Defense Policy Board. This is a group of advisors who suggest strategic direction to the Pentagon. During the early years of the Iraq War, this board was stacked with individuals who had deep financial ties to the very companies benefiting from the war. We already mentioned Dick Cheney. He was the CEO of Halliburton from 1995 to 2000. During his time there, he helped the company secure billions in government contracts. When he left to become vice president in 2000, he received a severance package worth over $30 million. Then, just a few years later, his former company was awarded the massive log cap contract without a competitive bid. Now, legally, Cheney had severed ties. But optically and practically, the message to the industry was clear. If you have friends in high places, the rules are different for you. This culture of coziness meant that oversight was practically non-existent. During the war, government auditors, the people whose job it is to catch fraud, were often overruled by military commanders who just wanted the supplies moving. There's a documented case where Pentagon auditors challenged over $200 million in KBR charges. They said the costs were unreasonable and unsupported. In the corporate world, you don't pay unreasonable bills. But in the war economy, the army simply waived the objections and paid KBR anyway. Why? Because KBR was too big to fail. They had become so embedded in the military's operations that firing them would have ground the war to a halt. The military had outsourced its own survival to a private corporation. And it wasn't just the big guys. The corruption trickled down. Let's talk about the gold rush mentality. It wasn't just corporations. it was individuals. There were American officers in charge of handing out cash for reconstruction projects who simply started pocketing it. There was a major in the US Army named John Cockerham. He was responsible for awarding contracts for bottled water and other supplies in Kuwait and Iraq. Over a few years, he took $9 million in bribes from contractors. He would award a contract to a specific company, and they would secretly wire money to his offshore accounts. He even had his wife and sister help him launder the money. Cockerham was eventually caught and sent to prison. But for every Cockerham we caught, how many others walked away with suitcases full of cash? The Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction estimated that fraud and waste amounted to at least $8 billion. That is $8 billion of your money, stolen or wasted in the desert. But the ultimate tragedy of this heist isn't just the lost money, it's the lost trust. And the lost lives. When a contractor charges $10,000 for a forklift that doesn't work, or builds a health clinic that falls apart, it creates resentment among the local population. The Iraqi people saw American contractors driving around in SUVs, making fortunes, while their electricity was out and their water was dirty. This fueled the insurgency. It is not an exaggeration to say that corruption killed American soldiers. Every dollar stolen was a dollar not spent on armor or intelligence or genuine reconstruction that could have stabilized the country. When we failed to rebuild Iraq because contractors were looting the budget, the country descended into chaos. And American troops had to stay longer, fight harder, and die in greater numbers to clean up the mess. The heist of Halliburton wasn't a victimless crime. The victims were the taxpayers who footed the bill, the Iraqi civilians who lived in the ruins of half-built projects, and the soldiers who were served rotten food and dirty water while their corporate suppliers posted record profits. So, what is the legacy of this $40 billion scam? You might think that after all the hearings, the audits, and the scandals, things would have changed. You might think that the government would have banned cost-plus contracts or shut down the revolving door. But you would be wrong. KBR eventually spun off from Halliburton, but both companies are still massive players in the defense industry. They still receive government contracts. The cost-plus model is still used for major defense projects today. The F-35 fighter jet program, the most expensive weapon system in history, has suffered from the exact same cost overruns and lack of accountability. The Iraq War taught the defense industry a valuable lesson. War is profitable. And prolonged, messy, inefficient war is even more profitable. As long as the checks keep clearing, there is no economic incentive to finish the job quickly or efficiently. When we look back at the Iraq War, we often argue about the politics. Was the intelligence wrong? Was the strategy flawed? But we rarely look at the balance sheet. The truth is, for the companies involved, the Iraq War was a massive success. It was a financial bonanza that transferred trillions of dollars from the American public to a handful of private corporations. And until we change the economic incentives of war, until we stop treating national defense like a for-profit business, this heist will happen again. In fact, it's probably happening right now. If you found this story infuriating, you need to see my next video. I'm going to break down the black budget, the billions of dollars the Pentagon spends every year on projects so secret, they don't even have to tell Congress what they are. Click right here to watch that. And if you want to support independent journalism that follows the money, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.